great pleasure to be back at the Met Dialogue. I wish I was back there in person like last year, but I will settle for a virtual interaction this year. If you actually look at what is globalization, I think a lot of it is the indivisibility of our existence, and four of those expressions are in migration, in climate change, as we've seen now in pandemics, and in terrorism. These are all areas where national governments will try and shape outcomes, but international cooperation is absolutely critical. Now, we must recognize that the migration of workers and professionals is as central to globalization as the mobility of capital, goods, and services. In fact, as the knowledge economy gains ground, global availability of talent is going to become more salient. And clearly here, demographic factors also have a bearing because some societies have more talent because of their demography. So what I would really urge, this conference to do is really look at migration and mobility in a composite way and see it in a sense as a human expression of the transfer of technology, of the promotion of innovation, of the building of business, and of the sharing of knowledge. I guess we can all more or less anticipate is that a post-COVID world order would put a greater premium on how we redefine national security. That national security will be much more about economic security, health security, in many countries, food security, energy security. And I would suggest to you that reliable human resources is intrinsic to creating more resilient supply chains. To my mind, actually, the era of alliances is diluting. I'm not saying that alliances would go away. I mean, Italy is a member of an alliance. Europe is largely covered by an alliance. But I think what an alliance means, how it plays out, I think all of that's going to change. Certainly, the last 4 years of, policies out of Washington is compelling a significant rethink as well. I think the way to go is to understand it's a multipolar world, leverage the multipolarity of the world, and then deal with the challenges of the day as effectively as you can. First of all, no, it is not a question of principle. India has nothing in principle against free trade agreements or preferential trade agreements. We have, in fact, a current interest with many partners. And specifically where the EU is concerned, we were negotiating with the EU till 2013. Okay. Then in 2013, they could not close out the deal. Now, this was the tenure of the previous government, the end of the tenure of the previous government. So there was a change of government in 2014. The government of Prime Minister Modi offered to the EU that they would like to reopen or continue those negotiations. In fact, it was the EU which took the stance from 2014 saying, look, right now we have other priorities. I don't know if we are ready, So for the last 6 years, and I say this as someone who sat in the room, heard my own leaders say this, heard the responses from the EU leadership. The reluctance to engage from 2014, this I can testify personally, is not from India's side, it is from EU's side, even today. Okay, and in the last 1 year, I have been to Brussels twice and brought up the subject with the commissioner mandated to deal with us. And that was pretty much the answer I got, which was that, we need to think this through. We're not sure we want to do this at this time. So in fact, whether somebody has something against FTAs, you should ask the EU, you shouldn't be asking me. We do have existing FTAs with the ASEAN. ASEAN collectively, with many individual ASEAN members, with Japan, with Korea. So if you looked at the RCEP partners, we did not have with China, with Australia, and with New Zealand. Okay, so there will be the net additions in a way. Apart from which, the quality difference between our existing RCAs and what the RCEP was also a fact. Okay, you should look actually at our trade record with the RCEP countries, all the RCEP countries, including China, for the last 15-20 years. Our trade deficit has just gone up massively with them. A lot of our negotiations were to address problems that we saw coming out of our experiences with these current FTAs, with the ASEAN, with Japan, with Korea, etc. You know, some of it related to market access, some of it related to the possibility of import surges, because again, you know, we were not assured of actually how the market economy exactly works in this zone. So we had a whole set of issues. Okay. Now we entered the negotiations and we stayed with it because we were very sincere in our desire to look at this opportunity. But finally, we had to make a judgment as a government whether we joined an arrangement where many of our basic concerns were not met. In any negotiation, not just an FTA negotiation. Because you have entered a negotiation doesn't mean you have to agree to the conclusion even if it is not in your interest. Okay. So the idea that, you know, there would have been great benefits waiting for us at the end of the rainbow, I don't buy that. Cheap, often subsidized imports from countries who are not all market economies have actually delayed reforms in it, because people found, oh, I have a solution by importing it from outside. You know, I have cheap components. Why should I make a component industry? Okay, so I would actually argue that entering into arrangements which, in a sense, do not work for you, where really true comparative advantages do not come into play, where there are a lot of non-market factors at play, I would argue that far from encouraging reform, they've had a very, very deleterious impact on our domestic economy. Today, structurally, in international relations, India and the United States have started developing more and more convergences. Why did it happen? It happened really because the Cold War ended. When the Cold War ended, a lot of what America had against India was no longer relevant. So if you actually start seeing the the temperature graph of Indo-American relations, you can actually see from the 90s, gradually it goes up and then it goes up higher and higher. In some ways, Clinton's visit to India in 99, most people agree would be a turning point. We had George W. Bush, who did something extraordinary for the relationship, which was the India-US nuclear deal. Then we had Barack Obama, and that relationship actually flowered as well. And Barack Obama was the first American president to be present at the Republic Day in India. And then we had Donald Trump, with whom we got along well. It is a test of our, it's a testament to our diplomacy that you've had 4 administrations, and with each one of them, actually our relationship has grown. The reason why that has happened is because there is a structural convergence here. So I am very confident that India-US relations will continue to do well. I think there are larger forces, in a sense, which are supporting it. And and in diplomacy, in foreign policy, as you know, the more you do, the more possibilities open up.